So let's go on. Okay, so we're going to start with, or continue with Hilchot Tsitsit. The sheets in front of you are the Siman Chet, which is the first Siman of Hilchot Tsitsit in the Shulchan Aruch, as well as some cut and paste printouts from the Tur and the Bet Yosef, which will help us to understand some of these halachot that are less clear. So yesterday, or last week I should say, we left off in Halakha. I think we completed Halakha Yud Aleph, which, but you know what? We're going to go back just to Halakha Yud or Seif Yud, and continue from there. So we had mentioned, the last point that we had mentioned was in Halakha Tet was the idea of checking the Chutei Tzitzit, checking the tzitzit before one says the bracha. Now the Rambam doesn't mention anything about this, and in fact, if you look on the sheet that of the Tur and the Bet Yosef, you will see that he mentions on the very bottom of that first page of Tur, the one that's a printout page from that looks like this. So he says on the bottom that Ken Katav Harosh Besof Hilchot Tzitzit, that this comes from the Rosh, from Rabbeinu Asher. At the end of the Hilchot Tzitzit, and he says, "V'hachared el devar Hashem yivdok tzitzit kodem atifa." So it's considered hachared el devar Hashem means it's not ikar hadin. It's not something where if you didn't do it, you did a sin. It's hachared el devar Hashem means somebody who's very meticulous about doing mitzvot. Yivdok tzitzit kodem atifa kedei shelo yivarach bracha levatala. So actually in the Tshuvot, in other words, in the Rosh wrote Hilchot Tzitzit, and he also wrote Teshuvot, responsa literature. So in the responsum that he actually wrote, he said, that actually, he says that the custom wasn't for people to do that. However, because we assume that they have a cheskat kashrut. If you leave something intact, you don't assume it got ruined. Katav Rabbeinu kedvarav b'psakim she'achared al devar Hashem yeshlo livdok. However, in the halachot, in other words, when the Rosh answered questions about halakha, he told them the pure halakha. He said, really, you don't have to do it. If you're very careful, you'll do it. But in the halachot, when he gave the conclusions, he said, you should do it. So that's what we see in the Shulchan Aruch is brought, that he describes Ye'ayen b'chotei tzitzit, a person should do that. Okay, so it's advice, but it's a good advice. Halakha Yud in the Shulchan Aruch is in Lovesh Talit Katan be'od she'en yadav nikiyot. Person gets up in the morning and they put on the Talit Katan. They put on their Talit Katan under their clothing. And he hasn't washed his hands yet, so he doesn't want to say Hashem's name because his hands are dirty, let's say. Now, it's not necessarily true that your hands are dirty when you wake up in the morning. Like if you wake up and you're wearing pajamas, your hands are really not dirty. But back then, most of the time, people slept unclothed. So the concern was that they touched their body in the private places while they were sleeping.
There are a couple of things. Ruach Ra.
Ruach Ra is something else. You can say a bracha with Ruach Ra in your hand, though.
Right. We had that whole conversation.
You just say
with Mili Demanki when you can clean your hands.
Right, but it doesn't take off the Ruach Ra. That's something else. Right, the Ruach Ra is something else. So he says, Yimashmesh b'tzitzit v'yivarech alav. O k'shiyilbash talit acher yivarech alav. So he says, you can't, if your hands are dirty, actually. So let's assume the person sleeps in a state of undress, and therefore he's concerned that his hands are dirty in the morning. So it doesn't mean that you need to wash netilat yadayim just to say Hashem's name. That's not actually true. But if your hands are unclean because they touched places they shouldn't have, so then you shouldn't say the bracha, obviously. But either when you wash your hands, you play with the tzitzit and you say the bracha, or you wait till you put on the next talit and say the bracha. That's also okay. He says v'chaven liftor gam etzeh, and then he has in mind to cover this one as well. Ve'en tzarich lemashmesh b'tzitziot shel rishon. And if he's putting on another talit later, he doesn't have to touch the original talit. In other words, if he put on the talit katan, and at the time he didn't say a bracha on the talit katan, and then he comes to synagogue, and he puts on the talit gadol, he doesn't have to touch the talit katan under his shirt when he's saying the blessing on the talit gadol. He just puts on the talit gadol. He has in mind when he's saying the bracha that it should cover both, and that's good. Then he says,
You said last week or in the recording that actually this is preferable.
Which one?
Nowadays there was a question about the size.
Right. Okay, that's true. So nowadays there's a whole issue about whether many of the what passes for a talit katan is even sufficient in size to justify a beracha, because the minimum size, especially according to the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, they don't have two different categories. They don't have a category called al mitzvat tzitzit and a category called lehitatef b'tzitzit. According to the Rambam, there's only one beracha, which is lehitatef b'tzitzit. There's only one measurement. Okay, which is that it has to be this, that it could cover a child, right? That it has to be something that an adult could go out in the street with quickly, and that could cover the majority of a child who's like, let's say, 8 years old. So that's not going to be true about many of the talitot katan that we have. The small talitot are not big enough to cover a child. An 8-year-old child wouldn't cover most of them, and you wouldn't be able to walk out into the street quickly, let's say, to grab the newspaper wearing just your talit katan. Right, you wouldn't do that because it's just not big enough. So therefore, the issue is the size of our talit katan even enough to say the bracha? So that's why many say it's better, not to say the bracha at all on the talit katan, and just when you put on the talit gadol, say the bracha and have in mind for the talit katan as well in case it requires a bracha. But yeah, it's a problem.
Who came up with al mitzvah tzitzit?
The Rama has al mitzvah tzitzit for the talit katan. Yeah, he mentions it in Halakha Vav, in Seif Vav. He says v'yesh omrim shemevarchin alav al mitzvah tzitzit. The reason is because there's a question, and the Bet Yosef mentions it. I didn't copy this part of the Bet Yosef because we already passed this halakha. But the Bet Yosef mentions that there's a basic machloket. Since the rabbis made the bracha lehitatef b'tzitzit, right, to wrap yourself in tzitzit, does that mean that that's part of the mitzvah, that you must wrap yourself? Wrapping means wrapping the head as well as the body. So anything less than that doesn't count at all? Or is that just the language of the beracha because at that time that was what their talit was like? So the Shulchan Aruch the Bet Yosef brings two opinions. One opinion that says that now that any talit that you don't do ituf, you really can't say the beracha at all. If it doesn't wrap around, if you don't wrap it around you, you can't say it at all. And another opinion, which was the one that he favors and endorses, is the one that says, in those days, that the talitot that they wore were like cloaks that that they wrapped around their head as well as their body. So the bracha was lehitatef b'tzitzit. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that it has to be lehitatef b'tzitzit. It doesn't say in the Torah that you have to be wrapped in the tzitzit. It's just wearing the tzitzit. So therefore the Shulchan Aruch says that's the language of the beracha. But sometimes the language of the beracha is not exactly the way that, it doesn't indicate the form of the mitzvah. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, actually, you just pick up your talit and you put it on. There's no wrapping, there's no nothing, you don't have to do anything. We do that customarily because he mentions, like even with the talit katan, it's nice to fulfill all the views. And since there are some opinions that say you're supposed to do ituf, it doesn't hurt to do the ituf and to wrap yourself. But really the bottom line halakha is that you don't need to do that. So otherwise, and that's why the Shulchan Aruch will say that if your talit katan were large enough to meet the minimum requirements, then you would say the blessing of lehitatef b'tzitzit, even though you're not wrapping yourself in the tzitzit. And again here, he says, since you can do it, it doesn't hurt to wrap yourself in the talit katan for a second when you say the beracha, so that you fulfill all the opinions. But really the Shulchan Aruch says that the language of the beracha is not prescriptive. It's not telling you how you have to do the mitzvah. It's just descriptive of the way that they used to do it. That's basically what he says in the Bet Yosef. So, but anyway, that is the issue with the talit katan of today, that it really is probably not a requisite size, and that's why it's probably not good to say a bracha on most of them.
So how the Ashkenazic, the Ravakim,
they just do the talit katan. But even there, if you go to a good chanut, they'll tell you, you should buy the larger one because there's a safek. They know that there are issues with the size of it. They'll try to recommend you one that's larger. Like they would always say to me, you need to get at least the 20 or the 22, but it was way too big on me. But they'd say, no, you have to get it, and it wasn't comfortable. But that was the size that they think meets the requirement.
That's the size that they think.
That was the one that they tried to push on me. I don't know what it was based on, but that's what they always used to say. You have to take the 20 or the 22. I'm like, but the 18 is the one that fit me personally.
Same price?
Yeah, they're the same price. Yeah. No, the Sephardic one is more expensive because of the Sephardic time. Anyway, so now it says Ikar mitzvat talit katan, and this is an interesting, very very interesting halakha because this halakha contradicts current practice, except unless you're like a Breslov or one of the Hasidim that does this. Ikar mitzvat talit katan lelovsho al begadav. Al begadav.
Nobody does it.
Nobody does that. Kedei shetamid yireu v'yizkor mitzvot. So the person will see it, because what does it say in the Torah? You're supposed to see the talit, the tzitzit. Nobody does that.
Actually, some people do.
You'll see in some circles, like Hasidim do it. Hasidim do it.
They're
Yeah.
smart too because it's actually less hot that way.
You'll see the Hasidim wear and also it saves you cleaning because when it gets less sweaty.
Well, I'm just saying when you walk around in the summer and you wear like 3 layers and one of them is wool.
Yeah.
And you're like, and you see this Hasid, yeah, I mean, he's so religious.
He's also wearing
He's
a
super
suit, a big black suit.
No.
Right.
In the afternoons, the Hasid, they walk around just a kippah and just a regular shirt. They don't have to wear an undershirt underneath.
Right, and they have the talit over
It's
it.
all airy, right? Because the talit is less air and stuff.
Yeah, it's true.
So what they do now is with the people that were under
Yeah.
it's outside.
So some people wear the actual talit katan on their clothes. Some just have the tzitziot hanging out, and then the Sephardim in general they put it inside. And so so obviously that's not what the Shulchan Aruch said. The Shulchan Aruch actually says that the talit katan is supposed to be outside of your clothing, but it was really based on Kabbalah. It's really based on Sod to put it inside. Okay, so that was based on Kabbalah. And some of the Sephardic poskim, like, for example, Rav Mesas has a tshuva where he says, no, it's not just because of that, it's because also of disrespect to the talit when you go in the bathroom or you go in other places that are not clean. It's not nice to have the tzitziot out, just like we don't wear a talit gadol into the bathroom. Even though technically you're allowed to wear a talit gadol into the bathroom, it's not respectful, so we don't do it. So he says the same with talit katan, you shouldn't wear it on top of your clothes because it's not so respectful. That's what the Rav Mesas says. Because Rav Mesas has a general approach that, which is very interesting, that we don't follow. Every time one of our minhagim follows Kabbalah, Rav Mesas says, nope, that's not true, because the average person is not supposed to follow Kabbalah. That's only for Mekubalim. So he always finds some nigle source, some source based on the what is revealed, to explain it. So even when it comes to like the shaking of the lulav in the directions of the Arizal, and so according to the directions of the Arizal, it's a reflection of the different sefirot. When you do the right and left, different sefirot. So he says, no, that can't be the reason because we wouldn't follow Sod because we're not Mekubalim. We're not. The Mekubalim should do that, but we average people, we're Ein lanu esek banistarot. We don't have the ability. We don't understand. So therefore, he brings a Gemara that he brings another source of which has a basis for the right and the left and everything, all those directions, based not on any Kabbalah. So he always looks for a way to explain even the Kabbalistic minhagim based on something non-Kabbalistic. Okay, so now we said,
The guiding principle is not to stick out from the crowd.
Well,
in yeshiva, when they wear it out, you wear it out. If you're in the workplace, nobody wears it.
It's a showing off thing. We're drawing attention thing. Well, if I remember correctly, the Mishnah Berurah talks about that issue of attracting attention and appearances and stuff. Yeah, certainly.
But everybody's Mekubalim, right?
Yeah, everyone tries to be. Everyone
They don't know
tries.
Torah, but they know.
That's exactly. Yeah, exactly. They won't come to the shiur about halakha, but they'll come if I did a zohar, this place would be full of 500 people. Yeah, we'll have 200 people from every medina v'ir v'ir.
Yeah.
Everyone would come for Zohar. They'll come. The
All of a sudden,
Chumash,
every Aish rabbi.
Chumash, and they all the outreach centers they do
Every
Kabbalah.
outreach by definition.
Yeah,
What you need to do is
because that's what it sells.
you based on the Zohar.
Yeah. No, what I should do is call it Kabbalah and then just teach like Chumash. They won't know.
They wouldn't know that.
They don't know what's in the Zohar, so I'll just tell them, oh yeah, the Zohar. Okay, so anyway, it's true.
The Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Beit Knesset there, this is a Sephardic Beit Knesset.
Yeah.
Both the Shabbat, they're makpid to read Zohar.
Yeah.
And I told them,
They're
I
very
don't
interested.
understand it, I'm just reading words. They said, it doesn't matter, you get credit.
Yeah, they believe in that.
They have this-
The one person that really, in a way, tried to mediate that was or to moderate that was Rav Ovadia, because he was like, well, no, it's halakha. I'm not a mikubal. I don't know. So he has respect for the mikubalim. He says, oh yeah, they're doing a good thing, but I am just in the Dalit Amot Shel Halakha. I don't.
Isn't that the traditional Sephardic? From my
No, a lot of them were Mekubalim. No, yeah, he respected Kabbalah. Yeah. He respected it, but if you read it, he never got into the Kabbalah. He never got into it. So I mean, like the Bet Yosef was also a Mekubal, but you would never know.
Right.
You'd never know from reading the Shulchan Aruch. So the Chacham Ovadia had a dream. I mean, that's the story. Have you ever read? There are a few about 10 years ago, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. They came out with a couple of biographies of Chacham Ovadia, but they're in Hebrew, but written by journalists. And one focused on his, Mishnato, sort of like his halachic stuff. And two of them were about his personal life. And I've read one of them. I was in the middle of reading it when I moved down here, and then I got so distracted when I moved down I never finished. But I read the first 2/3 of it. Yeah, I think I saw it. Yeah, I read the first 2/3 of it. It was very interesting. And one of the things it talked about was how he had a dream where Hashem told him, "En lecha isek b'nistarot, you shouldn't get involved in Kabbalah. Focus on Halakha." And so the rest of his life, that's basically what he did. That was the path that he followed. So I didn't know this was Penn Station. Penn Station. So okay. So next halakha, if you'd bet. Im yesh lo kama begadim shel arba kinafot. So if a person has several talitot that he's going to wear, let's say in those days, many garments were four-cornered, so this was more practical. Nowadays, let's just imagine a case where a person has several garments that they're going to be putting on, and they're all four kinafot, four corners, and they all have tzitzit. So what does he do in that case? So kulam chayavim b'tzitzit. So first of all, it's not, in other words, what might you think? What might you think? So he says they're all obligated in tzitzit. So what's a chidush? Isn't that obvious? If you have a lot of doors in your house, aren't they all obligated in mezuzah?
Oh, because you're not wearing one.
No, you're wearing. You're going to put on three. You're going to put on an undershirt that has four corners. You're going to put on a shirt and a jacket. All of them have four corners. So what's the? Right, so that's it. So, in other words, you might think, I satisfied my obligation. I'm wearing a four-cornered garment and I put tzitzit on it. I don't have to put tzitzit on it. It's not a halakha that each garment has to. Maybe you'll think. In other words, you might think that it's not a requirement to have tzitziot on every four-cornered garment that you're wearing, as long as at the time that you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you have at least one of them with tzitziot. That should be enough. How many pairs of tefillin do you have? Only one. You don't have to have more than one. So why do you have? So when you have several garments on, even though they're all qualified for tzitziot, you put tzitzit only on one of them. That's a possibility to think that. So he comes along and says, no. When you're wearing multiple garments, that's why you can have a talit katan and also a talit gadol. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a talit katan and a talit gadol at the same time. Because only one garment at a time would require tzitziot. And in fact, there is an opinion like this. The Bet Yosef says that in the Sefer Orchot Chaim, he mentions that only the top garment requires tzitziot. If you're wearing multiple garments, only the top one. And in fact, if you look at the Perusha Ralbag ala Torah, which is not a very commonly studied commentary on the Torah, but it's a very good one. The commentary of the Ralbag actually says that. He says, I think you only need tzitzit on one garment at a time. So there was like one minority opinion out there that in the medieval period, in the Rishonim, that followed this view that you only need one of your garments to have tzitzit. But the halakha is that we follow that if you have 5 garments on, they would all require tzitziot. If you decided that you wanted to wear 5 four-cornered garments or 10, they would all require tzitziot because you're wearing them and they're 4 corners. However, if you put them all on at the same time, in other words, you're getting dressed and you lay out your clothes and you have 5 four-cornered garments that you're going to be putting on. So then, and you plan to put them all on. So then, so then you don't have to say 5 berachot because you're doing it all at the same time. Just like if you're putting up mezuzot in your house, and you have all the mezuzot ready, you're going to put up 3 mezuzot. You can say 1 bracha, don't interrupt, and you can put all 3 mezuzot up. Or let's say you do tevilat kelim. You went to the mikveh, you wanted to dip 5 pots. You don't have to say al tevilat kelim on each one. You do it one time, and you immerse all of them. As long as you don't interrupt. If you interrupt, you have to go back to the car. You realized you forgot one, you have to go back to the car, bring it. So now you have to start over. But in theory, you could do all of them with 1 baracha because you're doing the mitzvah. You're doing the same mitzvah 10 times as part of one process. Once you split the process into two, so now it's a different story. So he says, if you were to do this, it would be okay. And he says, Im mafsik benehem, but if you interrupt, so now you have, if you interrupt. So for example, he gives let's say the case is, you had a talit katan at home, and the talit katan was large enough to say a bracha on it, and you said the hitatif b'tzitzit according to the Shulchan Aruch, or you said al mitzvat tzitzit according to the Rama, and then you come to synagogue and you want to put on your talit gadol, so of course you're going to say another bracha. You didn't do it at the same time. But if you're praying at home in your house and you put on the talit katan and talit gadol right after one another, that's a different story. He says, similarly, if a person was coordinating their style and they said, you know what, I'm just going to put on one of these four-cornered garments, and then he says, you know what, I don't like this look, I'm going to put on another one. So originally he wasn't thinking about doing the two of them, he was only thinking about one of them. So his baracha doesn't apply to the things that he didn't have in mind. If he had in mind both of them and they were both there, so that then it's considered one process and one baracha will cover it. If he didn't have them both in mind, or they weren't both there, they were in two different places, so then it's an interruption and they require two barachot. And this is a general principle actually that applies to many cases. And then the Rama adds, very interesting, he says, if the person, let's say, put on talit number one, he has two talitot in front of him. He's thinking, I'm going to put these both on. He says the baracha, puts on talit number one. He says, you know what? I don't want this one. I changed my mind. Takes it off. Can he put on talit number two now without a baracha? The Rama says no, because that's also considered like an interruption. Because originally you had in mind for both of these. So it was one continuous action. But then you made a break because you took off the first one before you put on the second one. So that's another instance of interruption where you would require a new baracha for the second talit. So now he mentions the case that I had mentioned to you before. And if Yud Gimel, he says, Halovesh talit katan umvarech alav. If a person puts on the small talit and he says the blessing at home, and then he comes and he puts on the talit gadol in synagogue, he has to say a new baracha. It's an interruption. He came to synagogue. However, why? Because the walk to the Beit Knesset is, now we drive, but during the weekday, but it's considered an interruption. ואם מתפלל בתוך ביתו אם היה דתו מתחילה גם על טלית גדול ולא הפסיק בינתיים בשיחה או בדברים אחרים אינו צריך לחזור לברך. That's what I mentioned before, that if you're getting yourself ready at home and you're praying at home and you put on the first talit and you said, and let's imagine you're putting the talit katan over your clothes, because otherwise you would have to get dressed in between, putting on the talit katan and putting on the talit gadol. But let's say we're one of those people who puts on the talit on top. So he puts the talit katan on top, and then he goes and puts on his talit gadol right afterwards because he's ready to pray. That person doesn't have to say another baracha on the talit gadol, because he's doing it as one without an interruption. He didn't just get distracted. He didn't start talking. He didn't walk out of the room. He went straight from putting on the talit katan to putting on the talit gadol. Now, so if Yudalit says in pashat talito, this is a fascinating halakha, and we're going to have to get into a little bit of the source for this because it's a very complicated issue. Okay, so we're going to look at the Beit Yosef on this in a moment. So this is contrary to what many people believe the halakha is. That's why it's so important. He says, Im pashat talito, if a person takes off their talit at any time, according to the Beit Yosef, afilo ayadato lachzor letatef bo miyad, even if he took it off to put it back on, he took his talit off, he's going to put it back on in 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. According to the Shulchan Aruch, tzarich levarech kishyachzor v'yetatef bo. He has to go back and say the baracha again. Now, we don't know this as being the halakha. Most people think that that's not correct. Okay? Yeah. So, right. So what's he talking about?
The problem is a shower. Like if you have to, in the middle of the day, you have to.
Right, for any break, you take it off, or you go to the bathroom.
I'm not going to put on a talit gadol after a shower, so
Right.
what do? You like?
Well, let's say a person takes off the talit gadol to go to the bathroom.
No, I'm not.
And they come back out.
I take a shower. I'm not going to put on a talit gadol. It's for shafri.
That's right. So you put the talit katan back on, you mean?
Yeah.
So if you say a bracha on that alone, so you would. If you don't, then you would.
Shirim is to
Right, because you still have an issue of the shiur on it. That's still a problem. It's a fake brachot akil. It's okay to do it, but just I wouldn't say the bracha if you're not sure about the measurement.
You cannot have in mind in the morning to have it cover all the.
So this is the issue. So we're going to see. So this is what the Shulchan Aruch actually, what the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch is. Okay. Now it's unknown because the practice today is not according to this, and we're going to look at the Beit Yosef a little bit, and we're going to get an idea of why it is. So if you look at the second, if this is the first sheet of Beit Yosef, the back of that sheet. Okay, towards the bottom where it says Vim Pashat Talito Velo Yadato Lilovsho Miyad. This is from the Tur. Okay, so in other words, what did the Tur said on the top? That if you look at the Tur on the front side of the page, Vim Pashat Talito Velo Yadato Lilovsho Miyad. Okay, he said if you took off your talit and you didn't want to put it right back on, this is the Tur on the top of the first page. So he says, so certainly if you didn't have an intention to put it back on right away, you were planning on putting it away and you decided to put it back on, so then you have to say a baracha. But if his mentality was, I'm just taking this off for a second, I'm running out and I'm going to put it right back on. For example, he decided he wanted to go to the bathroom. This is the Tur, the Balaturim is speaking, okay? He's saying, I'm not sure if he has to say a bracha. So this is the classic case, okay? You're in Shacharit, you have to go to the bathroom. You go. It's Shabbat, let's say, because that's when it's a longer shacharit. So people go to the bathroom. They hang their talit on the little hook over there. They go inside. So he says, I don't know what to do. Sheyesh panim lekan ulchan, because there's a basis for both ways. Why? The ikala memar. It's possible to say yesh. Ikala memar is Aramaic for ki yesh lomar. Efshar lomar. You could possibly say. Kevan di alfinan kol Torah mi tefillin. In general, we follow tefillin is the paradigm. Utfillin, and when it comes to tefillin, kol emat. Anytime he plays with the tefillin, in other words, if it falls out of place and you put it back in place, you're supposed to say another baracha. If it fell out of place and you fix it, you have to say another baracha. Okay, so perush im zazu mimikoman, they moved out of their place, or mimashmesh bahen lachziran mimkoman, and you're adjusting it to put it back. Im ken. So certainly here with the talit, you took the whole thing off. Should have to say a baracha. Miu yesh lomar. However, it's possible to say that there's a difference with tefillin, because when it comes to tefillin, it fell out of place and you didn't realize it. It wasn't on purpose. However, so that's what the Tur says. In other words, the Tur says that there's a difference between the case of tefillin and talit. Because when does it say you have to say another bracha on tefillin? When your tefillin fell and you didn't realize it, and then you had to put them back on. But if you purposely move your tefillin around, and you know what you're doing, you move it out of a place to tighten it or something like that, you wouldn't say another baracha. So he's saying you're doing it on purpose. Right, you're taking off the talit. So he says, I'm not sure, does on purpose matter or not? In other words, is the halakha that any time it's moved out of place, the mitzvah stopped, and now you're starting the mitzvah again? Because even with tefillin, even if you purposely move it off, at that moment, are you doing the mitzvah of wearing tefillin? No. Now you put it back, you start it again, it's a new thing. Same thing with the talit. When you go in the bathroom, you're not doing the mitzvah. It stopped. Or does it matter what your intention is? In other words, since you took a detour, but really your mind is still that you're going right back to the mitzvah, we don't consider it an interruption. Do we look at the reality? The bottom line is you're not doing the mitzvah, it stopped, and now you start it again, it's a new thing. Or do we look at your relationship to the mitzvah, which is ongoing, because even though you left it for a moment, you're coming right back. So in your mind, you're still connected to the mitzvah, even though for all practical purposes it stopped. So that's the question that the Torah raises. So what does the Beit Yosef do with this? So the Beit Yosef on the other side, where it says Vim Pashat Talito, he says like this: Kolomar. He says, in a case where it wasn't his intent to put it back on immediately, davar pashutu. Obviously, if you take off your talit and you fold it, and then you say, whoops, I forgot to do musaf. What am I doing? I took off my talit. It happened to me one time. I was like, it was Yom Kippur, and I forgot to wear the talit all day. So I'm taking off the talit after musaf. I said, shoot, I'm not supposed to take off the talit. So that's a case where when he took it off, he didn't have in mind to put it back on because he was thinking he was done. Right? So in that case, certainly in that case, if you removed your mind from the mitzvah, that's it. You're done. So now the Beit Yosef is going to explain what is the safek exactly. The place of the doubt is as follows. Because we use tefillin as our paradigm. As it says in Masechet Kiddushin. But tefillin dechol emat demimashmesh beho mevarech. Perush, and this is still the tour, like quoting from the tour, right? Im zazumi mikoman o mimashmesh behen lachziran mikoman. That if you move the tefillin, you have to say another beracha. Ve'ikal lebevarech shesiran mirosho legamre. Tzarich levarech b'kol sheken dezazumi mikoman. Right? So he says, and if when you just moved it out of its place and put it back, you have to say a beracha. Certainly, if you took it off, you have to say a beracha. There's no question. So even though you intended to put it back, so this is exactly what the Torah says. In other words, that does it make a difference whether you had intention or not? Does your intention factor into the picture? Do we say that since the person, that when it moved unintentionally, or when the talit fell off, let's say, there, for sure you have to say a beracha because you didn't have control over the situation. But when you had control over the situation and it was part of your game plan that you were taking the talit off, you're going to put it back on, or it's part of your game plan, you moved the tefillin to tighten it, maybe you shouldn't say a beracha in that case. That's the big question here. Okay, whether that matters or not. So now in the last paragraph here, the Beit Yosef is going to chime in and say, you know what? The whole safek, I don't agree. I have no idea why the Torah has a doubt here. What's the doubt? We have an explicit statement in Masechet Sukkah as follows: that Rava would get up early in the morning. Rava was one of the Amoraim, he was one of the rabbis of the Gemara. He would get up in the morning. He would go to the bathroom and come out. He would wash his hands and he would put on tefillin. And he would go to the and anytime he had to go to the bathroom, he would go back to the bathroom, go to the bathroom again, okay, come back out, put the tefillin on, and say a blessing again. So what does that show you? When he took off tefillin to go into the bathroom, did he know he was going to put them back on?
Yes.
Yeah, because back then they wore tefillin all day. And yet, what did he do? He said the blessing again. So what's the question? He was definitely wearing tefillin all day. And certainly when a person takes off their tefillin to go into the bathroom, they have intent to put them back on when they come out. And therefore the Beit Yosef says the same halakha should apply to tzitzit. I don't see the reason for making any distinction here whatsoever, says the Beit Yosef. And therefore he says that just like if a person took off their tefillin and went into the bathroom and came out and put the tefillin back on, that it is clear in the Talmud that they would have to say the beracha again. So too with tzitzit. And he says, I don't understand why the Torah had a question. How could the Torah question if you took off your tefillin with intent to put them back on, whether you'd have to say a beracha, when we see that Rava took them off, went to the bathroom, he knew he was going to put them back on, and he said a beracha. What's the question? Okay, so that's actually where the Beit Yosef's ruling comes from. He says, not only do I see this as being the halakha, I don't see how anyone could not see this as the halakha. It's clear as day to me, says the Beit Yosef. And if you look at the if you look at the top of the next page that I gave you, even though there's no rule that you're not allowed to be distracted when you're wearing tzitzit. Like when you're wearing tefillin, you're supposed to have kavanah that you have on tefillin the entire time. You're supposed to be aware of it the whole time. Tzitzit, there's no such halakha, but yet, mevarech alei kol zman shemitatef. He's still, anytime he puts it on, he should say the baracha, meaning, the Beit Yosef is saying, meaning, even when he goes into the bathroom, he takes off the talit, he goes in the bathroom, he comes out, he puts the talit back on, he should say another baracha. That's what the Beit Yosef says.
Is there anybody that holds that when you say Shema in the morning, that's Eilu Sheker if you don't have tzitzit?
It doesn't mention that.
It's only tefillin.
The reason is because tzitzit is not a chovat. It's not a chovah. In other words, we go out of our way to wear tzitzit on purpose. But if a person didn't have a four-cornered garment, they wouldn't really be required to wear tzitzit at all. So we can't really call it. It's not the same as tefillin. So okay. So then he goes on in the next section here in the Beit Yosef, where he brings similar issues. He says, "Katafa agur nishal mari molin al yotze mi bet hakneset u'misir talito v'chozer v'lovsho im yesh lo levarech." So the question is, if a person takes off their talit and they put it back on, what do? Veheshiv de maram mitzrich lachzor levarech u'maharach. Another one of the these late Rishonim, early Achronim said that you have to that you don't say a bracha again. Okay, that hechad nishar alav talit katan as kishechozer lo yachzor levarech. Okay, so that was the and he says ulechora nir'ed b'meisir talito v'dato lelovsho miyad ma'iri de'imken hu cholek al rabbeinu shenata dato lomar she'eno tzarich levarech. Okay, so basically what he says is that you see from here that they were debating the same issue. If you take off your talit and you're immediately going to put it back on, do you need to say another baracha? And he goes on to say that he doesn't understand what difference it makes if you're wearing your talit underneath or not. In other words, if you're still wearing the talit katan or not, why should that matter? Because he says according to this, if you took off your talit, so if we read it, so it says, in other words, if you assume that they're talking about a case where he didn't intend to put the talit back on immediately, and that's why he makes him say the bracha again. But if you were going to put the talit right back on, he wouldn't require another bracha. If we interpret it like that, Kedivrei Rabbeinu, like the Tur says. So then, then what is the Maharach saying here? He's distinguishing between whether you had the talit katan on or not. According to that, tatuim lavash talit b'shacharit v'esiro v'chazar v'lovsho b'mincha lo yitzarich levarechim nishar lav talit katan. Is he really seriously saying that if I took off the talit gadol at shacharit because I'm wearing a talit katan all day, when I put on my talit gadol at mincha, I don't have to say a bracha after all day not wearing it? How's it possible? It's called reductio ad absurdum, right? It doesn't make any sense. Therefore, it's the same thing as taking it off without intent to put it back on. So he says, so therefore, the Beit Yosef concludes again that the clear halakha, as far as he's concerned, is that even if you go to the bathroom in the middle of shacharit, you take off your talit, you have to say another bracha on the talit when you come out. So why is it that nobody follows this? So and look at the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch also says that there are some who say that if you're going to put the talit right back on, you don't have to say a bracha again. That's like the practice today. That some say that it's as long as you have a talit katan on. So in other words, there are three views. According to the Shulchan Aruch, whether you have a talit katan or not, we don't really care. You took off the talit. You went to the bathroom. You're planning on coming right back. I don't care. You got out of line. If you get out of line in the supermarket and you say, "Oh, I was just going to get something," they're not going to let you back in your spot on the line. It's gone. You've got to start over. Okay, same thing. Yeah. So that's the Shulchan Aruch. He says, once you took off the talit, I don't care. You were about to come back. It doesn't matter. Then you have the other view that says, no, it does matter. If you were planning to come back, whether or not you are wearing a talit katan, you don't have to say a bracha because your intent was to put the talit back on. And then you have the middle position that says it depends. If you were wearing a talit katan and you took the talit off with the intent of putting it right back on, since you still had a connection to the mitzvah, both mentally and physically, you could say, because mentally you had an intent to put the talit back on, and physically you still had the talit katan going with you. So therefore, there's some continuity. You don't have to say a bracha. So you could basically divide it into those three categories. According to the Shulchan Aruch, we don't care about your mental intentions. We're not interested in intentions. You stop doing the mitzvah. That talit, your wearing of that talit ended. The mitzvah was over for that talit. You came to put it on again, it's a new thing. Okay, the other extreme is the view that the Rama says first. That no, we look only at your intention. Oh, your intention was that you were coming right back? Okay, then the mitzvah wasn't over for you. You were just taking a detour. Then the third position is a hybrid of the two. If your intention was to go back and you still were being mikayem the same mitzvah because you had the talit katan on, so your involvement in the mitzvah never concluded. Both mentally you were still connected to the mitzvah and physically you were still in a state of fulfilling that mitzvah because you had the talit katan on. So your connection to the mitzvah remained intact even when you took off the talit gadol. Therefore, it's not just a mental connection, but even a physical connection is still there. So therefore you wouldn't have to say the bracha again. Okay, so those are the three opinions. So what's the reason why nobody follows this Shulchan Aruch? So the Bayit Chadash. So it would seem on the surface that that the Bet Yosef has a pretty devastating proof against the Tur, because he says it's clear as day. I mean, tefillin. It says in the Gemara that Rava wore tefillin all day. Anytime he went to the bathroom and he came out, he put on the tefillin and then he said another bracha. So the Bayit Chadash, which is Rav Yoel Sirkis, who was from the 16th century, says as follows. He says the following argument to defend the Tur. He says, he's actually an excellent commentary on the Tur. We don't spend too much time going into the details of what he says, but it's actually an excellent commentary to know, the Bach. And what he says is that, essentially he says there's a fundamental difference between tefillin and talit. Because tefillin, you're not allowed to wear in the bathroom. This is where this idea comes from that you're familiar with. Tefillin, you're not allowed to wear in the bathroom. So you can't tell me you were still involved in the mitzvah of tefillin when you went in the bathroom. That's absurd. You're not allowed to wear tefillin in the bathroom. We learned that in Masechet Shabbat too. You're not allowed to wear tefillin in the bathroom. We learned it in Masechet Berachot as well. You're not allowed to wear tefillin in the bathroom. That's reality. So therefore, when you go, there's no such thing as, I took a break from my tefillin to go to the bathroom, but I'm going to be right back. So I'm still involved in the mitzvah. No, when you're in the bathroom, that's it. There's no tefillin. Whereas Tsitsit, in theory, you can wear Tsitsit in the bathroom. So the Bach says the reason why the Tur doesn't make an equation between tefillin and tzitzit is because tefillin, when you're in the bathroom, you're what's called mufka. You are removed, totally removed from the mitzvah of tzitzit. of tefillin. When it comes to tzitzit, you can make an argument that da'ato lachzor ulehetatef. Your intention was to remain with the mitzvah. You took it off out of respect for the mitzvah because you didn't want to wear the talit in, but that was your volition because really you can wear tzitzit in the bathroom. So it's just that we don't wear the talit gadol out of respect in the bathroom, but really it's not prohibited to wear tzitzit because you can wear the talit katan in the bathroom, right? So it's not because of kedusha, not because of holiness. Even the Rambam said you can wear tzitzit in the bet kisei; it's no problem. There's no kedusha. So it's just a practice to take it off to go into the bathroom. So that's what the Bach says. The Bach's resolution of this, or the way that he solves the problem, is he says the Tur didn't forget this Gemara about Rava, that every time he went to the bathroom he said the bracha again. There's a clear distinction here. We don't learn from tefillin, because tefillin you're not allowed to wear in the bathroom. Talit, you're allowed to. So that's what the Bach says. Now, not wanting to get into a pilpul here to too much, but just to question whether that's really... Now that's the distinction that's kind of won the day. So if you look in most Achronim, you look in even the Yalkut Yosef, the way that Chacham Ovadia, what he says to do, he says to follow basically like what the Bach says, not to say a bracha if you had in mind to put the talit back on. If you look at the Mishnah Berurah, that's for sure what he says. So all the contemporaries say that based on this distinction of the Bach. But of course the question is, we can say the same thing about the Bet Yosef that the Bet Yosef said about the Tur, which is, how could the Bet Yosef not know such an obvious distinction? And in fact, the Tur himself doesn't seem to hold by that distinction. Because what does the Tur say? He says, we learn all things from tefillin. We learn tzitzit from tefillin. And just like when tefillin, it says that a person who takes off the tefillin has to say a bracha again, he asks, well, does it matter whether you did it intentionally or unintentionally? He doesn't bring in any other distinction between tefillin and talit. He doesn't mention, well, tefillin is holy and you're not allowed to wear it in the bathroom, and tzitzit is not holy. Why doesn't, if that's the fundamental distinction here, we have a concept of ha'ikar chaser min hasefer. Right? If that's really the distinction, why is it not in the book? Why is it not mentioned in the book? So the Bet Yosef's argument will be, who cares? See, I'm impersonating the Bet Yosef. I'm not. I can't speak for him. If he were here, perhaps he would have a different answer. But I would suggest that probably if the Bet Yosef heard this distinction of the Bach, he would give a very simple response. Who cares? What difference does it make if you could wear it into the bathroom or not? You're not wearing it, are you? You could do a lot of things. Could is a very potent word. But the fact is, you stop doing the mitzvah. When you walk into the bathroom, are you fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzit? Assuming that you don't have a talit katan. Let's say you don't. Let's assume the worst, okay? You don't have a talit katan. You walked into the bathroom. Are you fulfilling the mitzvah? No. So when you come out, are you going to start fulfilling the mitzvah? Yes, because you're going to put it back on. Tefillin, you took off the tefillin. Are you fulfilling the mitzvah now? No. You're in the bathroom. You're fulfilling the mitzvah? No. You come out. You're fulfilling the mitzvah now? Yes. You want to say the bracha again? Okay, so why does it matter? In other words, the Bach has a nice distinction. He makes a legitimate distinction. But the Tur doesn't seem to have that distinction because he says we learn out a comparison from tefillin to tzitzit. And he doesn't make this sort of he doesn't put tefillin on a higher level than tzitzit. And the Bet Yosef will just say to you, very nice distinction, very impressive thought, but the bottom line is it's the same. You came up with a very creative way in which there's a difference between tefillin and tzitzit, that you're not allowed to wear tefillin in the bathroom, and you're allowed to wear talit in the bathroom, but at the end of the day, did you wear the talit into the bathroom? No, so what do I care if you could have worn it into the bathroom? So what? So I think that's really what the Bet Yosef's response would be. That's why in the Shulchan Aruch he doesn't hold this distinction between talit and tefillin, because he would say that if you took off the talit, you were done with the mitzvah, that's it. And probably the Rambam would say the same, because the Rambam says anytime you're mitatef, anytime you put on the talit, you would say the bracha again. You stopped wearing it, you went in the bathroom. What do I care that you're coming back to do it again? You stopped, you came back to it. You stopped the mitzvah, you came back to the mitzvah. Just like you would say the blessing on the tefillin again, you say the blessing on the talit again. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. But again, it is a subject of dispute. It's a subject. The reason why the practice became lenient was because of a principle of sefek barachot lahakel. In general, if you have a doubt about barachot, we're lenient. But all I'm saying is to defend Maran Bet Yosef that he didn't miss an obvious distinction. He probably just doesn't hold that distinction is legitimate. He says the bottom line is you stop the mitzvah and you resume the mitzvah. When you stop a mitzvah and you come back and do the mitzvah again, you have to say another baracha. Just like if you stopped eating your cereal and you left the room and you came back, you have to say another bracha. I don't care that you wanted to come back. It doesn't matter that you wanted to come back. Let's say you're drinking coffee, okay? And you leave and you go to the bathroom and you have in mind that when you come back, you have to say another bracha. You can't rely on the bracha you made before it. So that's it. Now the laws of barachot with foods and with mitzvot are different. But the point is that you could have taken your coffee into the bathroom. It wouldn't be sanitary. I would never want to, eat in your house again. But that doesn't mean that you could have. There's no halakha that says you can't bring coffee into the bathroom. It's disgusting. I would highly recommend never doing that. But could be done. So therefore, do we say that? Since I could have brought it with me, I don't have to say another bracha when I come out. No, we don't care about could have. We care about what you did. And I think that's why the Bet Yosef at the end of the day doesn't have this distinction, even though it's a commonly accepted distinction. So now we move forward. Next halakha, very little known halakha again, is Saif Tedvav, number 15. And this one is actually agreed upon by everyone, incidentally, which is nice to know. He says, Im nafla talito shelo b'mitkaven. If a person is standing and their talit simply falls off. It falls off. It happens, sometimes the talit just falls off. Just slips right off of you. And he goes back and he puts it back on. In this case, for sure he has to say a bracha. And by the way, everybody agrees with that. Everybody agrees that if it wasn't your intent. See, the only machloket that we had about going to the bathroom and stuff like that is where in your mind you said, I'm going to take off the talit and I'm going to put it back on. But here it simply fell off of you. So for sure it wasn't your intent, and now you're starting the mitzvah over again. He says, but that's only if the entire thing fell off. However, even if most of it fell off, but you caught it before it slipped all the way, sometimes it starts sliding down the shoulder, you're carrying the Torah or you're doing something, sometimes when you're doing something it starts to slip, you caught it, as long as you caught a little bit of it and it didn't totally fall off, even if most of it fell off, but you caught a little bit on the end, you don't have to say another beracha. You intervened before the mitzvah was totally removed from you. But if it falls off the floor and it's off of you, even if you put it right back on, everybody agrees, by the way, in that case. There's no machloket. In that case, you must say the beracha again. Halan betalito balayla. Let's say a person goes to sleep. Some people like to sleep with teddy bears. Some people like to sleep with Cabbage Patch Kids. Some people like to sleep with whatever. But you like to sleep in your talit. This person sleeps in their talit. Tzarich levarech alav baboker. When you wake up in the morning, you have to say a beracha. Af im lo pishato, even if you never took it off, you still have to say bracha. V'tov lemashmesh bo b'shat bracha. It's good to play with the tzitzit, to move it when you say the bracha. And the Rama says, V'chen ya'aseh mi shelovesh talito kodem she'ir hayom. Similarly, one who puts on the talit before, when it's too early to say the bracha. It's still too early, but they put on their talit because they were starting out early that day. So when the time comes to say the beracha, they should move the talit a little bit and say the beracha at that point. These two cases are really the same. If you sleep in your talit, or you wake up too early, it's still dark, it's still nighttime, you put on the talit at nighttime, there's no mitzvah of tzitzit at nighttime. So, since there's no mitzvah of tzitzit at nighttime, even though you put it on, you can't say the beracha. As soon as it becomes a time to say the beracha, now you can say. Now, what you do is, now the Beit Yosef actually mentions, and we'll look at it, that you don't have to move the tzitzit around. He says, "V'tov lemashmesh bo b'shat beracha." That it's nice. It's a nice thing to show that you are saying the beracha, that you're moving the talit a little bit when you do it. But really, you could just say the beracha wearing it. You don't have to do anything physical along with that. Now we say the last Saif Yud Zayin, Nitkasa bebeged shu chayav b'tzitzit. If a person put on a garment that requires tzitzit, in other words, it's a four-cornered garment made of one of the materials that requires tzitzit, however, but he neglected to affix tzitzit to this garment, bitel mitzvah tzitzit, that is the only case in which one has officially negated or neglected the mitzvah of tzitzit. Not buying a talit. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you have to buy a talit. We learned this in the Rambam. There's no requirement to purchase a talit, to be the owner of a talit, to have a four-cornered garment. The mitzvah is, if you are going to put on a four-cornered garment, it must have tzitzit. Now the Rambam said, as the Gemara says, one should not exempt oneself from the mitzvah. If you have the opportunity to do the mitzvah, you should get that four-cornered garment so you can do the mitzvah. But we can't call you a person who is negating a mitzvah just because you didn't buy a four-cornered garment. It's when you put on the four-cornered garment without the tzitzit that you are violating, so to speak. You are rejecting or negating the mitzvah of tzitzit. And just that very, very last point, he says that he brings two different views about when the talit falls off of you, and he says that that some say that you don't have to say a bracha in that case, and he says that Rabbeinu Yonah also said that you don't have to say a beracha in that case, but we learn from the case of tefillin, just like we said before, that everyone agrees if the tefillin fall off out of place, right? They fall out of place without you realizing it, everybody would agree. Like if your tefillin just fell off, that you would have to say the beracha again. So same thing with talit. And he says that shekabala biyad harav Rabbeinu Yonah mirabotav, that it was an accepted principle from the teachers of Rabbeinu Yonah. Afilu nafala tzitzit mimenu ulekachom yad v'netatef bo shemevarech alav v'afal pi shelo nitkaven lasro me'alav ad kan lishono. So therefore he says that he had a tradition that even if the talit falls off of you, not on purpose, even if you immediately replace it on your body, you have to say the beracha again. And he says, but however, I will say that only if the entirety fell off, but not if only the majority fell off. That's where he gets it from. And the last point that we said about playing around with the tzitzit, if you put it on early, okay, so he brings there that it's not a requirement again, but it's something that is considered to be a preferable practice to sort of adjust the tzitzit a little bit to signify that you're starting the mitzvah anew as you say the beracha at that point. So if you put on the talit too early, that is what to do. Have a great day, everyone. Have a good evening. And Arvid?